Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 4 edition of the North Shore Drives Fantasy Favorites Show. I am here. My name is Dalton Brown. I'm here with Chris Dell. Chris Dell, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sports editor, fantasy football analyst. He not only finished number one overall out of 235 preseason draft rankers last year at FantasyPros, he is also number one so far in terms of in-season accuracy this season through 3 weeks. Chris, really impressive, man. I mean, you're number one among quarterback rankers, third at the running back position, 22nd at wide receiver, 17th in ranking those defenses. Obviously all really impressive marks when we're talking about 200 plus people involved. So really excited to get your thoughts. There's no better information on the market than what we are going to get here with Chris. Obviously fun, a lot of fun through 3 weeks, a lot of injuries through 3 weeks, a lot for us to get to. Chris, where I think where we discussed getting started on this show, I think we're at about that point in the season where it's worth taking a closer look at what a redraft would look like now. And what I mean by that is, the top 10 has shifted quite a bit. And, the people who have seen your rest of season rankings have an idea of what that looks like already. But, let's go ahead and jump right into that. Who goes number one overall if the season were to restart in week 4?
Yeah, I think it's a worthy discussion now that we have multiple weeks under our belt. It's not just reacting to week 1. It's not just reacting to week 2. I think 3 weeks, we're getting close to the quarter point. We do business by quarters, right? What's your quarterly revenue update for your company? It's kind of what are the quarterly returns for fantasy, right? And we're 1 week away from that. I think we can start making some assumptions. And as we know on this show, we talked about in the preseason, assumptions are made to be adjusted and adapted and changed, right? And I think that's the most important thing we want to remember with all this. To me, the clear number one, I don't think you can really dispute this, honestly, is Saquon Barkley with the Eagles, right? And we'll stick to half PPR scoring. That's what I primarily use with my rankings. That's how the FantasyPros system grades their rankers in this accuracy contest we're talking about. So I'll stick to that. Like, you can readjust a little bit if you want, if you're on the non-PPR side, if you're on the full PPR side. I think half PPR kind of covers everything. So having said that, Barkley's number one by far, and he's been the most consistent in regards to his usage, in regards to his touchdown equity. Two things we were worried about with Barkley, he was still a solid second-round pick, but the things we were a little concerned about was Jalen Hurts vulturing touchdowns at the goal line, and Barkley not getting a super high target share because he's a running back in a run-first quarterback offense. What we've seen through 3 weeks so far with Philly is that A.J. Brown's played only one game. Devonta Smith just got hurt in the middle of last week's game, and Barkley's been the main guy. Like, this is the offensive line is weaker than it has been in past years, so they're a little less confident in dropping Jalen Hurts back as much as they used to. And we're seeing Barkley eat because of that. So I think that Barkley, to me, is a clear number one. And the difference that I have and where I've had some feedback or disagreement on these rest of the season rankings, and I'm curious to hear your opinion, Dalton, is who's after Barkley? For me, overall, okay, I understand that running backs, in terms of the top 20 at each position, I fully understand that running backs have greatly outscored receivers or any other position for that matter through 3 weeks, right? But once you get past that top 10 receiver range, it gets real bleak real fast. So in my opinion, because of the market value, the demand and the supply and demand of this is a fantasy football market. If you don't have Barkley, I'd much rather have an elite receiver. I need to have one of these top 10 receivers, which is why number 2 through 10 for me are all wide receivers. And then the next running backs, they go at number 11 and 12, which is Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall with Marvin Harrison Jr. mixed in between. So I'll rattle them off real quick. Lamb, Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins. I've got Malik Neighbors in there. New addition there, slightly moved him up. He was a round 2 pick for us before the season started. I've also moved up DK Metcalf into that range. The confidence that's growing in me with this Seattle passing game, which I'm fully buying. rest of the season. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then I've got Rashee Rice, a new addition as well. He was more of a round 3 pick. I've got him firmly inside my top 10. My 10th overall, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'll mention him. He's in there too. My last one before we get to Bijan and Breece is A.J. Brown. And to me, here's how you want to approach A.J. Brown. Like he technically is the number 1 receiver in fantasy points per game if you only count his week 1. Him and Malik Neighbors are neck and neck in that situation. He's missed the last few weeks because he hurt his hamstring in practice. Now, the Eagles have a week 5 bye. I don't think A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith, they didn't practice today, which is a Wednesday. I don't expect them to play in week 5. Or in week 4, they're going to get the week 5 bye. I expect the big 3, Brown, Smith, and Goddard, to be fully ready for week 6 and beyond. So if you're in a spot where you're 2-1, you're 3-0, you're confident in your team regardless, I would try to buy low on A.J. Brown. I don't there's no reason to suspect a re-injury as long as he's fully healthy when he comes back. We know A.J. Brown has top 5 potential, if not any week overall wide receiver 1 potential at the position. So again, yes, RBs have outscored wide receivers so far, but the value of having a top 10 receiver is much greater because running backs can be replaced via injury. If Bijan gets hurt today, Algier is a top 10 running back tomorrow. If Breece Hall gets hurt today, Braylon Allen is a top 10 running back tomorrow. You cannot say that about any of the elite receivers we're talking about in this top 10, top 12 range. So if I'm redoing the first round, it's Barkley, not CMC number 1, and then it's all wide receivers for the rest of the first round. That's how I'm re-ranking the top 10/top 12 for the rest of the season. And you can see those in my top 250 rest of season rankings.
Yeah, one guy in there that I really want to touch on too, because you were higher on Malik Neighbors than most of the market was preseason. I know I took him in the second round of 2 different drafts, more or less based on your recommendation. And boy, does that ever look good now. Looking at Neighbors so far, the game log with him has been absurd, right? I mean, we saw the 18 targets in week 2. But overall, I mean, week 1, he puts up the 6.6, but week 2 and week 3, this has been the best wide receiver in the league from a fantasy perspective. And, I think a guy like that moving forward, is there any chance that you would potentially, is there, I'll put it this way. Do you have any concern at all about him moving forward, living up to what he's been so far? Or are you fully bought in on this is who he's going to be?
Oh, no, you got to buy it. I thought you were going to – I was like, don't say it, Dalton. Don't say, are you selling high? There's no chance I'm selling high on hey, if somebody offered me Rashee Rice and Amon-Ra St. Brown for Malik Neighbors, like, sure, why not? But, I mean, that's not going to happen, right? Like, the target share is just – I mean, 30 targets in the last 2 weeks, 18 catches, 200-plus yards. He did it against Cleveland. 2 touchdowns, 12 targets, 8 receptions against, maybe not the greatest Browns defense as we've seen through 3 weeks, but still a solid above average defense, I would call Cleveland, with some solid cornerbacks. The reason why I was laughing when you were talking about me being higher on Neighbors, Dalton, is like I did 5 redraft leagues this year, and I only got Neighbors in one of them because all you SOBs in my home league read my rankings and took Neighbors before I got the chance to. So I only got Neighbors in one, which sucks. But yes, I was higher on him. Same thing with Rashee Rice. I got sniped on Rashee Rice in all but one league as well, or maybe 1 or 2 leagues as well. So that's another one I wish I had more of, even though I was high on them. So yeah, to me, look, Malik Neighbors, you could make a case for him being the number 1 receiver rest of the season. I think when you look through the top 10 guys I mentioned, okay, let's save A.J. Brown because he's hurt. I think Rashee Rice, St. Brown, Neighbors, Nico, Chase, Jefferson, Lamb, you could make valid arguments for any one of those guys to be the number 1 receiver rest of the season. I would even throw borderline DK Metcalf into that mix. If this Seattle right now, if you look at their pass rate over expectation, they're one of the highest in the league. I believe it's just want to double check because I was just like, pass rate over expectation, Bengals and Seahawks tied for number 1 in the NFL right now. I want to fully buy into both of those passing games. And those are the guys I have faith in elite usage and elite consistent production. You notice I didn't mention Garrett Wilson. He's in that next tier for me right now. Jets offense doesn't run enough plays for me on a per game basis. I'm a little worried about the upcoming schedule, although I do believe Garrett Wilson is a buy low if you can find someone who's panicking on him. If you're in a good position where you can ride out this tough short-term schedule, I think Garrett Wilson could put himself in that conversation in the next month or so. Him and Marvin Harrison are the next two receivers out of that list for me.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, let's go ahead and talk about a few of these injuries that we've seen pop up in week 4 and in the last couple days. There are 4 guys that I want to just get a little bit of your thought on here. First one, really unfortunate on Sunday, Devontae Smith going down with a concussion. Bit of an ugly play there. Definitely some questions flying around about how it was handled on field. You mentioned that the Eagles are probably going to be without both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith this week. Are there any moves that you're making to pick up some of these other Eagles pass catchers? I mean, obviously Dallas Goedert is going to, be pretty valuable this week, but are you going after a Jahan Dotson or anybody similar this week?
No, I wouldn't touch any of them. If you're in a deep league and backup running backs handcuffs are at a premium, one thing to note, I post this on my Twitter every week, is a utilization and usage thread. I give my top takeaways from every team in the NFL based off route, snaps, and target data from PFF. You can catch that on my Twitter handle. It's near the top of my feed. The reason I bring that up is because Will Shipley's not playing at all. So if there were an injury to Saquon, I would expect actually Kenneth Gainwell to lead in that backfield. So not really answering your question, but he's kind of more relevant to me than the other receivers are, is what I mean. Dallas Goedert's the overall tight end 1 this week. That's without question. I'm struggling right now, Dalton, of where to rank Jalen Hurts because, how much will he need to throw in this game? I think they really try to put it more on Barkley's shoulders. I think that Barkley's rushing attempts prop could be a very good bet this week because they just don't have anything. And do they want to run Hurts more because they don't have Smith and Brown? I'm not sure about that either. You want to keep Smith for the long term when this team does have Super Bowl aspirations. They think they're in that contender mix in the NFC. So I'm not touching, even in deep leagues, man. What I wrote in the Eagles thread on that post is that it was a 3-way split for secondary routes and snaps. It was Jahan Dotson, our old friend Paris Campbell, and Florida State rookie Johnny Wilson, who's very athletic, a lot of potential for the future. I'd call him a dynasty stash. The only way you're ever using Dotson, Campbell, or Wilson is like a DFS dart throw in a tournament. I'm not putting them anywhere near my redraft starting lineups or not even stashing them off waivers. It's just no long-term upside for me for those guys, in my opinion.
Couple tight ends this week that are now dealing with injury. Oddly enough, I saw these two swap for one another in one of the worst trades I've seen in any of my home leagues. I saw them swapped 1-for-1, Sam Laporta and McBride here.
Wow.
What
is the point of a 1-for-1? I swear, half the this is my tirade for the week. Half the questions I get on Twitter about trades, it's a position for position, same position swap. I'm like, well, what's your opinion on that player? If you think your opinion of the guy you're getting is better, then you won the trade until further notice. These are trades that don't make sense to me, but go on and tell me.
Well, I mean, between those two, right, Trey McBride and Sam Laporta, I want to talk a little bit about their injuries, right? Laporta suffered what's being called a low ankle sprain. I haven't been able to find anything as to whether he practiced today or not, today being Wednesday. Okay. So I don't know what to expect from Laporta going into this weekend. Trey McBride in concussion protocol did not practice Wednesday. I'd be surprised if he played this weekend. Are there any kind of contingency plans that you think are worth investing in with either of them, maybe Brock Wright in Detroit or one of the backups in Arizona?
Yeah, so good question the way you framed it. I don't expect McBride to play because of the concussion aspect. Laporta is tricky. It's a low ankle sprain. That's how they deemed it, right? In that case, I would say there's still a chance he plays. He practices this week in limited fashion. Doesn't mean that he's going to necessarily suit up, though. Dalton, we're all hurting at tight end right now, right? Who are we confident in weekly besides Dallas Goedert and let's be clear, Dallas Goedert has had one good week this year. That's it. He had a good week 3. He did nothing essentially in weeks 1 and 2. So when you talk about rest of season rankings for tight end, man, like Bowers had a down game. We were super high on him after 2 weeks. Kittle should be back. I think he practiced and he was limited in practice today for the Niners. He actually, to me, looks the most promising because he might be the only. I have to double check this, but he might be the only tight end who has had a top 10 week in every week he's played. He was tight end 10 in week 1. He was tight end 1 overall in week 2. So if you could somehow buy low on Kittle, I don't know if that's a possibility, but I was very close, Dalton, to putting Kittle as my tight end 1 rest of season. Right now, I have it McBride 1, Bowers 2, Kittle 3, Goddard 4, and then get into the rest, right? Laporta, Kelsey, I've downgraded a lot. They're in the lower half of the top 10. This week, if you have to pick between Laporta or McBride's backup, I'd much rather have Brock Wright. If Laporta is ruled out, he's essentially the one-on-one replacement. He ran a full assortment of routes and played a full assortment of snaps once Laporta left the game. Elijah Higgins is the backup for McBride. They do have a rookie. I don't think he'll play very much, but there's always a chance he could. Tip Ryman, very athletic kid on his own. I think it would be more Elijah Higgins, the veteran. Maybe could be a DFS dart throw, maybe like a super deep league streamer, because the Cardinals passing game has a beautiful matchup on paper against the Commanders. I would still have Brock Wright ranked as like a tight end 10 to 15 range. I would have Elijah Higgins more in like the tight end 20 to 25 range because he's more of the unknown at this point.
One other guy that I want to touch on in the injury segment before we jump into some position by position stuff, Alvin Kamara popped up in what was a surprise to me that he didn't practice today. And it sounds like he's just nursing some bumps and bruises, maybe a hip pointer. I don't know what you've heard on Alvin Kamara and whether there's actually concern about him missing this week. Obviously, like you said in the open, right? He's one of these clear top 4 running backs in fantasy right now. If Alvin Kamara misses, are we picking up a Jamal Williams? Are we doing anything with that? And what do you think are the chances that he actually does miss this week?
I think it's too early to tell. The reports came out that there was no real concern about him missing, but he's a veteran. He's got multiple dings on his body after a very big workload, not just in week 3, but to start the season. How long can Kamara hold up? I mean, we don't know. Like, we're not doctors. Doctors can't even predict injuries for the most part, right? So I think that if you're going to stash somebody, it's okay to stash Jamal Williams. I would say that Taysom Hill could be a sneaky stash. Coaches have been very confident, echoing that he's going to return for week 4. And he's listed on most sites as a tight end. So if he's listed as a tight end on your website for your app or whatever league you're in, then I would definitely a speculative stash because tight end is hurting right now, as we all know. And that would be the one guy I think has a little more upside than Jamal Williams. And this week, I would say mediocre matchup on paper against the Falcons. I don't know if there's a true handcuff to Alvin Kamara. I mean, if Kamara missed, if he was ruled out, I don't know who would get more carries between Taysom Hill or Jamal Williams. Maybe Jamal Williams gets more early down carries and they use Taysom at the goal line. That's another possibility. So I don't have the crystal ball there. I just know that Williams' upside is pretty limited. And unfortunately, as you know, Kendre Miller on IR, very appealing athletic profile, but he's really in the doghouse with the coaches. So I don't even think he's worth a stash at this point, unless you're in like a super 14, 16 team league with at least 1 or 2 IR spots. That'd be the only situation I'd really consider Kendre Miller. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Nothing really sexy on the horizon in terms of what you can do right now, but definitely a situation to monitor. Nonetheless, I would say, if anything, I would expect the Saints maybe to pass a lot more if Kamara was ruled out, just because they trust on him even as their early down back we've seen throughout the course of this season so far.
Let's jump into a little bit of position by position talk, and we're going to do this in 2 ways. We'll start with the quarterback position, and we'll start with each position from a rest of season perspective. Talk about some of these bigger names who you are, either much higher or much lower on than the market. The goal here is to get at, are there certain guys that, maybe we want to be targeting, or maybe that we want to be selling? Starting at quarterback, we've kind of beat the drum quite a bit on Patrick Mahomes the last couple of weeks, and why, despite the name recognition, this is not a quarterback that we should have too much fantasy interest in. The guy that sticks out to me this week, Anthony Richardson, has been steadily falling, right? And he's all the way down at your quarterback 12 this week. ECR with Richardson still has him in the top 10 at number 8. What do you think an Anthony Richardson owner should be doing at this point?
Preparing for the worst, which could be benching. I mean, I think that's like, talk about every viable scenario out there. It doesn't have to be a likely scenario, but it is you will hear the term in fantasy, non-zero chance, right? Like, there's a non-zero chance Richardson could get benched and be like, hey, look, like, you're still our guy, but you got to learn a little bit here, and guess who's the backup, by the way? Joe Flacco. I think the passing game opens up a ton if Flacco ever got the start there. I think you could say very similar things about Deshaun Watson getting benched in the near future and Jameis Winston going in. The Colts last year were one of the tops in the league. Even when Richardson played under Shane Steichen calling the plays, they were near the top of the league in plays per game, which made me very bullish on Richardson coming into this year. He struggled so much. He's done worse. And look, last year was a very limited sample. I thought he looked okay in certain games. I still think he can look better passing the ball, by the way. I think a lot of it's really mental. The Colts defense isn't doing him any favors. I think the more they stick to the ground game with Taylor, but they play the Steelers defense this week. I'm in Pittsburgh, and what I'll tell you is I actually do believe the hype that this might be the best defense in the league right now. I've got Pittsburgh as my number 1 DST this week. Oh, man. Turnover-prone Anthony Richardson with sacks, with potential interceptions, fumbles. Like, he's thrown some really shaky passes, and this Steelers defense can really capitalize on that. If they commit to stopping Jonathan Taylor and loading the box and forcing Richardson to throw, you could see this DST put up like 30 points type of week, So I would rather not start Richardson this week. The guys I've got ranked ahead of him, like, who might be available in your league: Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Andy Dalton, Baker Mayfield, Justin Fields. I've got Sam Darnold and Caleb Williams ranked right behind him. When push comes to shove, if I've got 3 guys ranked back-to-back, the actual projected final score is really not that much different. So if you're saying, hey, Chris, like, who should I start this week? And you see Richardson 15 and Darnold 16, that's essentially a tie, right? Like, this. It's all about kind of the tiers and the range they're in. I'd feel much more confident starting Caleb or Darnold this week, I'll tell you that, over Richardson. But I had to try to bump him down as much as I could because he still does have that rushing potential, even though he has not been running the ball as much as we hoped for those who drafted him so far.
Another guy that I think is worth talking about at the quarterback position, I think the market right now is, really about, I think we're in a funny spot here, right? Where I think the market is about as low as it's going to ever be on Joe Burrow in general. But you still have him up at number 7 in your rest of season rankings. Now, your difference with ECR is not that large, right? They have him at number 10. But I think he's a guy worth discussing because while he isn't in the Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen category, this is clearly a guy who should be starting in fantasy lineups at quarterback.
100%.
What's your take on him with the Bengals sitting at 0-3, and as far as your expectations with him moving forward?
Well, first of all, as a Bengals fan, I'll tell you what, you don't like to see your team start out 0-3. However, I will say as a Bengals fan, like, first of all, I think Zach Taylor should have been fired a long time ago. I think he's one of the most overrated play callers in the league. I thought that they made the Super Bowl years ago despite his play calling. Now it's almost too much to overcome with the holes they have on the offensive line and on defense, right? So let me get that out of the way first. Now we're 0-3, and as a fantasy owner, if I own Bengals players, Dalton, I love it. Like, the worse your defense is, the more times the offense is going to have to throw the ball. And Joe Burrow was quarterback 10 in fantasy in week 2. He was quarterback 7 in week 3. I mean, it's wheels up. They have fantastic matchups. The next 3 weeks, Panthers, Ravens, and Giants. The Ravens defense is nothing to be scared of anymore. This is not the Ravens defense of old. So, and then we saw T. Higgins come back. I thought in his first game back, first of all, he ran a full assortment of routes. He was a one foot away, one tippy toe away from having possibly 2 touchdowns in that game. And I think that with Higgins back, I'm more optimistic on Chase. I'm more optimistic on Yoshivas. I'm more actually maybe the one guy I like a little less are the tight ends, because I think that Yoshivas, Higgins, and Chase, that's a really good receiver trio. And I mean, how can you criticize Burrow? He had a couple errant throws, but overall it was pretty damn sharp on Monday Night Football in week 3. When you score 33 points, you should win more often than not. And the defense allowed touchdowns at every single drive for the Commanders. So to me, it's the top 4, the rushers, the rushers that can actually throw, right? So A-Rich right now no longer in this top tier like we were drafting him as. It's Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels. Then to me, there's a mini tier of who are the elite pocket passers, and Stroud and Burrow are 5 and 6 in my opinion. You can flip-flop them either way.
So let's move over to running backs here, because there are a couple guys that I'm really interested to hear your take on when I look at the rest of season. One guy in particular that sticks out to me like a sore thumb is David Montgomery. You have David Montgomery ranked as the RB10 for the rest of the season. And I think there are probably a few listeners who still think of David Montgomery almost as if he's a backup to Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
ECR has him at running back 20. That's still a player that you're starting if you view him as RB20. But, it sounds to me like David Montgomery is a guy that maybe we want to be trying to buy.
I think so, Dalton. Absolutely. I just want to double check the numbers here. 59 combined targets plus carries through week 3, right? That's just under 20. Let's call them opportunities, right? Targets plus carries, almost 20 opportunities per game. Then we look at Jahmyr Gibbs. He has 53 opportunities, 40 carries, 13 targets. Yes, in PPR, half PPR, you're going to get credit for the catches, but what happened in week 3? Jahmyr Gibbs had 0 catches, even though he was credited on the hook and ladder for a touchdown catch. He actually had 1 touchdown catch and 0 catches, if you can believe that. Dave Montgomery had 3 targets, 3 catches. So Dave Montgomery has 8 targets on the season. So you're talking about a guy who's getting more touches per game, and he's the preferred goal line back. The reason why I even like this even more, almost every single week, we talk about this when we talk about kickers as well. The Lions are going to be top 5 in implied team total, projected amount of points they're supposed to score every week. Most weeks, more often than not, each week during the season, they're going to be favorites. When they're favored, expected to score a lot, what does that mean? Positive game script means you run more. It means you try to milk the clock late. It means you have goal line opportunities. Maybe Gibbs gets some goal line opportunities. I'm not saying he won't, but Montgomery's going to get more than Gibbs does. And as long as they're both playing, Montgomery could wind up scoring more points at the end of the year. So I tried. Yes, okay, Gibbs is ranked higher right now because of the explosiveness, the big playability. But that can only get you so far. Montgomery has been fantastic this season. I've got them 2 spots apart. Rest of the season, Gibbs RB8, Montgomery RB10. You could start both these running backs every single week together in the same lineup and feel great about it. I'd be more than happy trying to buy high, quote unquote, on a David Montgomery right now.
One guy who the market's really hot on right now, so much so that ECR has him all the way up at number 4. And when I say ECR, I'm referring to the FantasyPros Expert Consensus Rankings. Jonathan Taylor is a guy you have down at number 11 overall, 7 spots behind. Now, listen, just like with Montgomery, right, there's no debate here as to whether this is a guy that you're starting or not. But, if you're a fantasy owner who's got Jonathan Taylor and, he's coming off a week where, in half PPR scoring, he put up 25.5 points with 2 rushing touchdowns, is this a guy that we're maybe trying to sell high on?
I don't know if I'd sell high on Taylor. It just all depends on what you can get. Depends what your roster looks like. I'm not just going to say he's a sell. I mean, I've got him in the top 12. So, like, he's a locked-in starter, like you said, like a locked-in top starter on your team. If you got him plus another guy in the top 12, you're looking great right now, right? But what I would say with Taylor is that look at the 3 weeks they played. In the 2 weeks where the Colts trailed, he was RB29 and RB14. And then in week 3, he was RB4 in a game that they actually won and were leading in a positive game script, right? So RB29, RB14, RB4. He's gotten better every week, but it's because the game environments have gotten better each week because probably the opponent, right? They played the Packers and Texans weeks 1 and 2. They played the lowly Bears in week 3. Even the Bears defense is playing below expectation right now. So I think you're going to get some hit or miss. Like you're going to get some really explosive runs and good weeks with long touchdowns. You're going to have some low weeks, I think, too, when they're playing from behind and he's leaving the field in certain passing situation and guys like Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon are coming on the field. So I think I've got him ranked appropriately, like right around what he's actually been doing on an average basis. Maybe I put him ahead of Derrick Henry. So I kind of got both those guys because they're like really game script dependent. If their teams fall behind, they're going to leave the field in certain situations. That's why I'd rather have a Jahmyr Gibbs or Devon Achane, who I think are locked into kind of every situation type of roles. And David Montgomery kind of included in that mix as well.
Who are some guys at the running back position that are maybe outside of that top 20, top 25? So they're not, week to week comfortable starts. Who are some guys down the board that maybe you think are worth taking that shot at stashing, right? Or maybe guys who the market still thinks are worth having on their bench that you think are worth cutting bait on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, like, once I get to RB17, I've got Jordan Mason. I made the official switch this week. I put Mason ahead of McCaffrey. Once I get past that, like ETN, a little shaky with how the Jags offense looks so far. Could they just be like, you know what, we're going to start mixing Bigsby in more? We saw that in week 1. Could happen in that situation. Tony Pollard, the Titans offense has looked a little shaky at best in the last couple of weeks. I've got him at RB20. Brian Robinson, RB21. Like once I get into this range, like you can poke a lot of holes in these backs. I would say in terms of upside, Jonathan Brooks, like I moved him up a lot for rest of the season rankings. I've got him as my RB26. Consensus-wise, he's RB32 right now. I mean, look at what Andy Dalton did to that offense. He elevated the prospects of every skill player in Carolina. So I bumped up everybody in Carolina's offense rest of the season. Deontay Johnson is a borderline top 25 receiver now. I think Xavier Leggett, the rookie receiver from South Carolina, he's a worthwhile stash if you've got room on your bench. Chuba Hubbard, I think, still will mix in a decent bit, even when Brooks comes back. You could see an actual viable committee where you could start both backs and feel good about it, at least for the near future with those guys. I think Brooks is like projected to be available to play starting in week 6. So we're already halfway there, like on the best running back by far in this past year's draft class, right? So he's a guy I would try to aggressively target in trades. If I am 2-1, if I am 3-0, if I've got depth to sell, I would probably consider trading away Christian McCaffrey in some type of package deal for a Jonathan Brooks. Technically, I have McCaffrey ranked higher rest of the season. I said this last week, the more time that goes on, I think McCaffrey could miss the entire regular season. Now he's doing the Kobe thing. He's going to Germany to get shots in his Achilles. Like it's not looking good for the regular. I'm not saying for the playoffs and the Super Bowl like they want to get to. I'm saying for the regular season, it's looking iffy right now for McCaffrey. I'll ask you a question real quick. I'll just touch on a few guys in a tier. I want to just rattle off some names real quick. After you get past Chuba Hubbard, the one injury away guys, some of these guys are actually starting to take over their backfield starting duties, even with no injuries. Bucky Irving over Rachaad White. I like Bucky Irving a lot. Rico Dowdle, massive usage edge over Zeke in week 3. At some point, the matchups will get easier for the Cowboys. We're already going to see that week 4, Thursday Night Football against the Giants. Braylon Allen, I mean, what needs to be said? We've seen what this kid can do. Youngest player in the league. he's outplaying Breece Hall to an extent on limited touches, right? He's not going to take away the job from Breece Hall, but I said before, if Breece Hall got hurt, Braylon Allen's a top 5 running back, no question about it. I'd much rather have these guys, and even like Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Algier. You can see at post-gazette.com every Sunday morning I post my weekly strategy column on the website, and I've got a specific section right at the top where I do sleeper rankings, I do stash rankings, and my top section I do is a one injury away running back handcuff rankings list that I update every single week depending on injuries. One super deep sleeper outside of the handcuffs we kind of all know are out there, Kamani Vidal. Gus Edwards only got 3 touches in week 3 against the Steelers, and he's like 1 week away from being a healthy scratch. Vidal comes from a small school, was a very talented running back in his athletic score profile. He could all of a sudden become the 1B to Dobbins 1A in that run-first offense. So he's a guy that I would much rather stash him at the end of my bench than have Javonte Williams, where Javonte might get 10 touches and trip into the end zone and score. Most weeks off, more weeks often than not, he's going to be extremely underwhelming. Give me the unknown, the wild card potential lottery ticket over the aging / fading plotters like Javonte Williams, like Alexander Madison, Zamir White, Zeke Elliott. I don't want these guys on my roster at all unless I'm in like a 20-team league and I have to start someone who's going to give me 5 points. So that's how I'm treating the rookie running backs, handcuff / upside stashes. Yes, like Vidal might not play until week 8, but I'd much rather take the chance he does play in week 4 and get some run than stash Javonte, where we've seen what he can do even with a big workload. And honestly, it's next to nothing. And that's where I stand in terms of my rest of the season running back rankings once we get past that top 25, 30 guys.
Let's jump over to wide receiver. From a full rest of season perspective, I think we've talked about a couple of these guys already in Malik Neighbors and DK Metcalf. I want to focus on a few others that you're, higher or lower on than ECR. One guy that is definitely among starters who, has kind of fallen out of favor with some. Devontae Adams, ECR has him down at 18. You got him a little bit ahead of that at number 13 here. What makes you feel a little bit better than the market about him moving forward?
Well, I think the sample is there for Devontae Adams. Like, I think this Raiders team is going to trail a lot, and they're going to throw a lot. And he's got 27 targets through 3 weeks. When you look at his overall finishes in half PPR so far, week 1, week 2, he was the wide receiver 6. The other 2 weeks, he still had 15 targets, but underwhelming finishes, right? So it's tough, Dalton, because I could probably rank him anywhere between wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 19, right where he is. I think that because of the negative game scripts of like they're going to need to pass a lot, I think we're going to see better days ahead. And you look at the rest of the guys in that range, like they all have question marks, man. Like Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Chris Olave, Drake London, not necessarily have been bastions of consistency this year, right? So I think once you get past wide receiver 12 rest of the season, which is Garrett Wilson I have right now, I think Devontae through DJ Moore at wide receiver 21, I mean, put him in a basket, toss him around. I think that you could kind of switch those guys any way you want. So I'm not going to say – I'm not like buying high on or buying really Devontae in terms of a trade, but I don't know if I'm just going to sell him and panic either because better days are ahead, and we saw that in week 2 as a top 6 finish.
Another guy who is in a lot of people's starting lineups. I know I'm facing him in 2 opposing starting lineups this week, who it seems like you're not so sure should be a start moving forward. Obviously, all these things are matchup dependent, right? But Zay Flowers, you have all the way down at wide receiver 33. ECR puts him right there in that wide receiver 2 category, right at number 21 overall. What has you down on Zay Flowers?
Well, it's the fact that the Ravens are projected to be favored in almost every game for the rest of the season. And we've seen what do the Ravens want to do when they're favored, Dalton? Lamar Jackson throws 16 times. I'm sorry, but if your quarterback's throwing 16 times a game, you don't want to start any pass catcher. I mean, Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews had 1 target each this past week. I think in 10-team leagues, they're both drops. Unfortunately, like I even traded for Mark Andrews in a league a couple weeks ago, hoping he would eventually turn it around. Unless the Ravens are trailing, I don't think we're going to see any good games from Likely. And Zay Flowers, yes, like when Lamar does throw, and I think this week I'm going to have Zay Flowers ranked higher because I believe the Ravens passing game will need to be pushed a little bit against the Bills. But in other weeks, I don't think you're going to see that. And that's kind of why Zay Flowers, to me, like when you look at his targets, he's getting like 75% of his targets behind the line of scrimmage. You're asking a lot for a receiver to do a lot with that in fantasy when a lot of those catches are going for 1 to 3 yards, and he's not getting the air yards needed to make consistent big plays down the field, which is why I'd still rather have my guy Tank Dell, who's top 25 in the league in air yards. He's getting those shots down the field. They're going to connect eventually in better matchups. That's why I've got Zay Flowers bumped considerably down for the rest of the season, because I think you could look at the targets, you could look at the target share, but context matters, situation matters, and that's what factors into my Zay Flowers ranking right now.
And wide receivers obviously a position that we go a little bit deeper with than running back in general. I know the leagues that I'm in with you are 3 wide receiver leagues plus a flex. And if those leagues are PPR, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up with as many as 4 wide receivers in your starting lineup in a lot of cases. So I think it's worth discussing some of these guys who might not be in that top 30 or top 35, who are either worth a look as a stash or worth a look as a desperation play. Who are some of these guys that you're a little higher on than the market a little bit further down the line?
Yeah, I would say this counts for week 4 and for the rest of the season. If Jordan Love plays, I still want to buy on Packers pass catchers. I also want to buy on Bears pass catchers because their defense, their defense has been leaking production. They gave up a lot of first downs and yardage to the Colts, and we know how much the Colts have been struggling offensively. And we saw in that same game, Caleb Williams throw the ball 50-plus times. He's not going to throw that much on a weekly basis, but the pass rate will be elevated nonetheless. They simply cannot run the ball right now. So I think Rome Odunze, I've got him a couple spots above a consensus rest of the season. Keenan Allen coming back eventually. I'd rather have Odunze. I'd rather have the younger, healthier talent. Cole Kmet at the tight end position I'd rather have above a lot of guys right now. I bid a lot on him in one of my fab budget leagues this past week. I bid like almost 30% of my budget on Cole Kmet because I only had David Njoku and the rest of the waivers were pretty bad. So those guys I like a lot compared to consensus. Jaden Reed, I've got him in that top 25. I think Romeo Doubs is worth a shot in that mid-range. Like I've got him as wide receiver 44 right now. A couple other guys further down the board. I mentioned Andre Yoshivas. I've got him as like a flex, like deep league starter. Quentin Johnston, I think you buy into the talent, into the unknown. If the Chargers need to keep throwing the ball and Herbert gets healthier, those are some of the guys I think profile-wise, like Dontavian Wicks. If Christian Watson ever went down, Wicks could rival Jaden Reed in targets for the Packers. And the same thing goes for Xavier Leggett. Adam Thielen, he's on IR. I think he's going to miss a lot more than 4 weeks than the minimum there. And I think a guy like Leggett, it's the unknown factor and the fact that Dalton's going to open up this passing game. Someone else is going to need to catch passes besides Deontay Johnson. I think Xavier Leggett, you don't have to start him this week, even though I think he could be a viable deep league flex. But he's definitely worth putting on the bench at the very least right now. Those are some guys down the board I like in terms of like young, upside, potential opportunity in high volume passing offenses. Check, 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 check. Those are the boxes I want to check when it comes to filling out the rest of my bench right now for the rest of the season.
Tight end's obviously been a really tricky position. We've talked about that a couple times already, how, very few people feel good about what they've got at the tight end position so far. If you're a Brock Bowers owner, you're probably feeling a little bit better than most. But obviously if you're somebody who, maybe bought Sam Laporta early on in your draft, you're not feeling that great about it, right? If you're a Travis Kelce owner, you're wondering, is this the end? And we already mentioned Mark Andrews. Looking at some of these guys rest of season, a couple names that stick out to me. I don't want to go too deep on David Njoku because I've heard you talk about him quite a bit the last few weeks, and I think we know why you're high on him, right? Like the target share when he's been healthy has been there. And obviously the athletic profile is absurd with David Njoku. But one guy that I'm curious about, he's not going to be back for a little while longer, but he snuck into your top 10. TJ Hawkinson, ECR has him at number 16. You've got him up at number 9. I mean, is there any kind of action that you think should be taken? Maybe somebody in your league has him stashed on their IR. They're not thinking about him much. Is he somebody maybe we want to target in a smaller deal?
Well, I've got Chris Dell and Dalton Brown ranked tight end 11 and tight end 12 too, man. Like, just give me anybody right now, Dalton. I mean, it's so bad. Like, McBride's been underwhelming, and somehow he's the consensus number 1 tight end rest of the season. So is Brock Bowers, George Kittle, Jake Ferguson. You can't really sneak him up on anybody because he's consensus 6. I got him 5th right now. David Njoku, I think try to buy him right now before he comes back. Like, of course, a guy can always get hurt a second time. Healthy guys can also get hurt a first time too. So I'm willing to bypass the injury. It's not a soft tissue thing going on. I think he can get back from that. Kevin Stefanski wants to air this thing out, whether it's Watson or Winston in the future. So to me, I've got Njoku tight end 6 right now. Consensus has him tight end 13. I think that means there might be some value trying to buy him from another manager who's been frustrated, having to go on waivers, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, and Hawkinson, he's going to be back now. We're 3 weeks in. I think the earliest week he can come back, according to the offseason reports, was around week 8/9. And we're talking about one of the most efficient passing games in the league, even if he's not even at full health, not the speed he was last year. It doesn't matter, man. We're seeing Jalen Naylor catch a touchdown every single week. Sam Darnold is playing well. This defense is playing good. The offensive line is playing well. I just want pieces of that pass game. I want pieces of the Browns passing game too. I didn't say that in the receiver segment, but I actually don't think Cooper's a sell high. I think he's more of a buy. If somebody's looking to sell him high, I think you want it because the usage was very strong even in weeks 1 and 2, even though we dudded in the box score. So yeah, those passing games in terms of their pass rate, I believe in. I also believe in the talent individually for Njoku and Hawkinson. So again, multiple boxes I'm checking off that are positive. That's why I'm buying in on those guys, because the rest of them, there's so many holes and red flags on the guys around them, which is why I have Cole Kmet above Travis Kelce, by the way, for the rest of the season. I mean, that's where we're at right now. You got to be willing to adjust your priors. I don't even think I'm overreacting to that right now. Cole Kmet at tight end 10.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned in there that I almost just want to hear you say it again, right? I'm in a 10-person league where I've got Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
And I heard you say that in a 10-team league, you're not just benching Mark Andrews, you're dropping Mark Andrews.
Yeah, unless you have just a ridiculous amount of bench spots. Most 10-team leagues, the waivers are plentiful, right? There are very good options on waivers. It just, you can't do it in a 10-team league, In a 12-team league, I'm willing to wait it out a little bit, depending on who I have, though, right? Because if I have Jake Ferguson, right, and I also have Andrews in a 12-team league, then I'm dropping Andrews. I want a rookie. I want a stash running back. Give me Tyler Beatty. Give me Roshan Johnson. Give me Cordell Patterson. He's a guy I think as startable this week, at least with Warren's out. I'd rather have those guys on my bench. I'd rather have a look ahead, who's playing the Dolphins in week 5. I'd rather stash them on my bench a week early than have a guy like Mark Andrews, who's he ran almost 0 routes last week. And if they're going to be leading, look, now let me just caveat this by saying that if you're ever going to give Andrews or likely another chance, do it in a game where it should be competitive and the Ravens will need to throw, like against Buffalo this week. So, like I said earlier, I would give it one more week. I think if they don't do anything again, then even in a 12-team league, you can look to drop them, because at that point, you're going to be strongly considering, for right reasons, Tyler Conklin, Kyle Pitts, Noah Fant. Those guys are going to surpass Andrews and likely in the projections if we don't see the pass rate increase for Baltimore. So that's where I'm at. Drops in a 10-team league, because I think there are better options out there, and then hold but almost drop in 12-team leagues or more.
Let's jump into some talk specifically about week 4, right? We've spent a lot of time so far today talking rest of season. I want to quickly run through the positions in week 4 and talk about some guys. And I'll start at quarterback. You have Andy Dalton as a starter this week. You've got him at quarterback 11. Now consensus on him has him at 22. So you're taking a little bit of a leap with Dalton. What is it about him, that has you starting him over a Patrick Mahomes and Anthony Richardson, guys like that?
Yeah. I mean, the Bengals are below average secondary. The Panthers are at home. It's a fantastic matchup. I mean, did you not see what Andy Dalton did in week 3? I mean, he did what like really was the norm for a lot of the last 5 to 10 years, Dalton, right? Like a quarterback throwing 35 times, 300 yards, and a couple touchdowns. Like that was kind of the norm. And it's the complete opposite of the norm in 2024, right? Andy Dalton was a quarterback 8. I got him as quarterback 11. So I'm not even saying he's going to do what he did last week. And you could argue he's got an even better matchup on paper in week 4 against the Bengals than he did against the Raiders last week. So wheels up for the Panthers for me. I want to attack this Bengals defense in every situation possible. It seems like the only time the Bengals defense shows up is against Patrick Mahomes. Like Lou Anarumo has Patrick Mahomes' number. But other than that, the defense has been walked on by the Patriots in week 1. Couldn't get a third down stop to save their life in that game. Couldn't do it again in week 3 against the Commanders. We saw the same thing happen, except the Commanders actually scored touchdowns. So that's where I'm at with Andy Dalton. Hey, you know what one thing you can't say about me, Dalton, is that I don't hold grudges, because I held a grudge for a long time as a Bengals fan for Andy Dalton, wanting them to get rid of him. But this is a new year. It's fantasy football. It's not real life football. And I would not let Andy Dalton sit on my waivers if I have any type of extra bench spots in my league, because I think in the right matchup, he's going to be a top 10 streamer until further notice. And that's where I'm at with him right now.
Yeah, I don't think and I think last week with Andy Dalton was such a breath of fresh air if you own any, fantasy stock in the Panthers at all, right? And for me, somebody who's been chasing the falling knife from a sports betting perspective with them, once again, I found myself on Panthers +7. Felt good to finally have one of those come through with the Panthers in general. Working our way over to running backs for this week specifically. I don't want to focus too much on guys who we know we're going to have in our lineup. Yeah. I want to look at some guys who are more on the fringe of, do we start them or do they not? One guy that I think is worth mentioning here, just because it's kind of been a real up and down story with him so far. Ramondre Stevenson, you've got him at running back 23 right now. That's pretty close to consensus, but I feel like I'm seeing him started pretty unanimously. Is there any thought at all to, like some of these other guys who are close to him maybe getting like if you're looking for an upside play, right? Is there some part of you that thinks, yeah, maybe I do give Bucky Irving a shot, right? Maybe I do give Cam Akers a shot, or is Ramondre still somebody that you're starting no matter what?
Oh man, this one's tough, man. Like when I rank them, I'm going a lot by like workload usage and projected touches, right? And we saw Kyron have a pretty good game getting a lot of touches against the Niners last week, even though they were big underdogs. So I don't want to completely write off Ramondre Stevenson, because this 49ers defense, maybe it's really not as good as we think. So I think in that case, you want to try to trust the usage a little bit. However, again, this is all about like tiers. For me this week, and I'm going to start doing this on my rankings. You can actually insert tiers, because I get a lot of questions about this. I think when you're looking at my rankings this week, I got Najee Harris, RB21, because no Jaylen Warren. After Najee at 21, it's a clear tier break for me. Josh Jacobs, we saw struggle, and this Vikings run defense is legit. We saw him get outplayed multiple weeks now by Emmanuel Wilson. Not saying Wilson's going to take the job, but by the way, don't let Wilson sit on waivers. He's one of the top stashes, in my opinion. You're going to see that in the Sunday column, updated when injury away list at post-gazette.com. Okay? So Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, those are the guys in that kind of like, yeah, they're RB2 usage, but the game script could go south. The game plan could go south. Like, why did the Titans only give Pollard 6 carries or whatever he had in week 3 when they were not trailing until later in the game? I have no idea why they did that. They had a great matchup on paper to take advantage of the run. I think that was a sheer play calling mishap for the Titans in that game, which makes me a little scared of their decision-making in terms of getting Tony Pollard the ball as much as he should, because he was great in weeks 1 and 2. I don't want to forget that either, right? So that's the range for me. Jerome Ford, pretty solid matchup this week against the Raiders, but do they use Deontay Foreman more when it's a positive game script if they're winning there? So there's red flags for all these guys. Zach Moss at the Panthers, I would consider starting Moss over Ramondre because they're in that same tier. Cam Akers, if the Texans are beating up on the Jaguars, then I could see Cam Akers getting a nice little bit of run in a positive game script. So Cam Akers over Ramondre, I'd consider it. Carson Steele over Ramondre had 20-plus opportunities in week 3 in his first ever start. Yeah, like I would consider those guys over Ramondre. I couldn't play Bucky over Ramondre just yet because, like, just not enough guaranteed touches. But he's in that next tier, and he is climbing his way up the ranks very quickly. I only have one spot in between Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, and that's Rico Dowdle, who I'm pretty bullish on this week as well. I might bump Rico slightly up with the matchup he has against the Giants, but that's where I'm at. Like Bucky, Cordell Patterson, Rico Dowdle, kind of like those 1A, 1B guys, but the matchup's looking good. So I would not mind like giving those guys some consideration as a flex play this week over some of these underperforming receivers who we would normally consider in that same type of spot.
One other running back I want to touch on in this segment because, consensus places Devin Singletary kind of down in that low-end RB2 range. You've got him as a fringe RB1 this week going up against Dallas tomorrow night, right? You've got him all the way up at RB13. Obviously Dallas's defense has not exactly been stout so far this season, to say the least. What really is your buy-in level on Devin Singletary right now?
So let's talk about this from rest of the season because I don't think this show is going to get posted until Friday or maybe Saturday on our YouTube channel. But you bring up a good point because I think with Singletary, first of all, I think that a must roster is his backup, Tyrone Tracy. He got a career high in touches, snaps, and routes in week 3. Singletary was kind of struggling, but he broke off a long run late. He slid right at the 1, so he could have scored that extra touchdown, but he didn't. But this Cowboys defense is really bad. Like they're getting run on, they're getting passed on at a very high rate. So any starting running back who's going to get 15, 20 plus touches, like they're going to be must starts for me against the Cowboys. That's why I've got Singletary ranked where he is. Rest of the season, not as bullish because I think he's the type of veteran where he's more mediocre than we want to at times, and I think that you could see a more talented running back, like more athletic, I would say, running back like a Tyrone Tracy start to eat into that workload a little bit. But this week, on a short week, you're going to trust the veteran. You're going to trust Devin Singletary. So he's a guy that, depending on where you're at, I could see you selling Singletary if he has a really big week against the Cowboys, or I could see you almost buying him if you're in a pinch this week, if you need some help. He could be a solid running back to plug in your flex RB2 spot. So I do think, again, Tyrone Tracy to me, I'd rather have him than Javonte Williams for the rest of the season, even though Javonte will likely get more touches in week 4. I'd rather have that kind of unknown upside in those guys like a Tyrone Tracy. So that's where I'm at with Singletary. And we want to be attacking not just the Bengals defense every week. The Cowboys is now one of like the 5 or 6 defenses we want to attack every single week with our skill players in fantasy.
Yeah, it just goes to show too, like, a lot of handicappers will talk about how defenses in the NFL from one year to the next can be somewhat random. Like a defense being really good in one year does not always mean that defense is going to be really good the next year. Unless we're talking about a Mike Tomlin defense, then it's usually going to be pretty darn good. But let's jump over to wide receivers a little bit here, specifically looking at week 4. I want to first touch on a guy that is going to be starting in almost everybody's lineup who owns him, and that's Brandon Ayuk. You actually have him down at wide receiver 25. Now, I still think he's going to start for you, but you have him like slightly outside that wide receiver 2 range, 14 spots below ECR. Is it the New England matchup? What is it there?
Oh, that's a good question, Dalton. I don't have the answer for everything, man. I try to do my best with this stuff and go from there. The process over results, right? And the results have been good so far. I'm not complaining. But with Ayuk, let's see. So far, I mean, obviously the production hasn't been there, right? If the Niners were not the Niners were projected to be touchdown plus favorites in week 3. Didn't happen. They lost outright, right? I lost my teaser bet. I had the Niners in a team. I think all 4 of the teams I had in teaser bets to win outright all lost as touchdown favorites. I had like Bengals, Browns in one, and then it was Bucks and 49ers in the other. So how about that? I'd rather just lose in historic fashion than just lose one leg of those. But that's another story for another day. So Brandon Ayuk, for me, when you look at his half PPR results, has not finished better than wide receiver 40 in any given week. the thing about that Rams matchup, it was a division game. Sometimes you shouldn't overlook how competitive the other team is going to be in those division games, right? But this Patriots offense, man, has shown me absolutely nothing that they can hang with any team in a back and forth. Yes, week 1 they beat the Bengals, but the Bengals only scored 10 points in that game. That was like Chase hadn't practiced yet. Higgins wasn't there. It was Burrow's first game off the wrist injury, et cetera, et cetera. Patriots are dead last in projected points this week, 14.75 points. I think it's a heavy Jordan Mason game, Dalton. I think Juwan Jennings, until Debo comes back, has almost cemented himself as like 1A, 1B with Ayuk in the receiver room. And Kittle's supposed to be back this week too. So I don't know how high I can rank Brandon Ayuk. If you're going to tell me, Chris, the Patriots are going to cover, it's going to be a close game, I'll bump Brandon Ayuk up like a half dozen spots. But I have a hard time believing that right now, and that's why I've still got him in a starter range. Like, he's okay as your second/third receiver, but if you've got better options that on teams that are likely to pass more, I'd much rather buy into those as a starter for week 4 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying makes a ton of sense, especially when we think about like that week 1 game where everybody was shocked by New England beating Cincinnati, right? Still a pretty shocking result, even with Cincinnati at 0-3. Yeah. But I think what it speaks to is New England's ability to really like muck up a game. Because that's a Cincinnati team that, I mean, look at them on Monday night, right? 38-33. Their defense can't stop a nosebleed, and the offense looks pretty efficient as time goes along, right? So, I think when you just take those 2 data points, it makes the Patriots a pretty unattractive team to play a wide receiver like this against. So I can certainly understand where you're coming from there.
Plus Christian Gonzalez, the rookie, has been a really good corner. He's not like a shutdown by any means, but he has made life difficult for guys like DK Metcalf and others. So, and even Garrett Wilson to an extent had a pretty down game against them too. So that kind of worries me about Ayuk as well in that situation.
On the flip side of that coin, I don't, we got two Monday night games again this week, right? We have Seattle and Detroit, which is going to be a ton of fun to watch. And then we've got Miami and Tennessee, which is probably not going to be a ton of fun to watch. But DeAndre Hopkins, you do have almost as a fringe starter this week. It depends on the type of league that you're in. If you're in a league where it's PPR, I think you seem to like DeAndre Hopkins as a potential flex option here at wide receiver 28. 14 spots above ECR, which has him at 42. You're pretty bought into D-Hop against Miami. Why is that?
A couple of reasons why I'm bullish on D-Hop moving forward as well in my rest of season rankings is that he was bumped up. This is his second game or third game technically because he barely played in week 1. So his routes and snaps have been slightly elevated for 3 straight weeks now, right? What did we see in his first week with 50% routes or more? He played exactly 50% of the routes. There was 44 dropbacks for the Titans. He ran 22 routes, right? 7 targets on 22 routes. Like, that's a 33% targets per route run rate. That's an elite rate. Not saying it's going to hold up over time, but you know what's going to happen? He's going to get more routes, which means he, even though his targets per route run is going to go down, the targets will either stay the same or go up, right? 73 yards and a touchdown. When you look at half PPR scoring, he was the wide receiver 16 overall. And this is a guy we've seen with a long sample when he's healthy. The Titans are still throwing the ball a decent bit as long as Levis is under center. They still seem committed to him, at least in the short term, as long as he cuts back on the turnovers, right? Well, how about this in week 4, Monday night? Dolphins are bottom 4 in the NFL in coverage grade per PFF. They can't stop anybody. So the only concern I have with Ridley as well, because Ridley's still top 5 in the league in air yards. I still think Ridley is a viable flex/fringe wide receiver 3 starter. I think on an average week, you're going to see Ridley and Hopkins alternate between startable weeks. Maybe you get a few weeks where they have a shootout and they're both starters, right? Like that, I still feel kind of similarly. I put Hopkins a little bit higher because he has more of the catchable target rates than like the prayers that Levis throws down the field. But because of those reasons, because of the soft matchup, I still think he's more viable than the other guys in his range. Like, he's not in that must-start territory, like you said, but Hopkins in the same range as T. Higgins, as George Pickens, the boom-bust nature of Rashid Shaheed, the Jaguars passing attack with Brian Thomas. Like, I think he's more than qualified to be in that range, and that's why I've got him kind of in that wide receiver 25 to 35 tier right now.
One other wide receiver that I want to hit on before we kind of move on from this is Michael Pittman Jr. This is a guy who, like, we saw go in a lot of leagues. He went in the top 4 rounds, and
not if you listen to this show, you wouldn't draft him.
No, certainly not if you listen to this show. But I'm telling you, in one of my home leagues, he went number 14 overall. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen.
I need to get in. I need to get in that league. By the way, send me an invite next year.
Oh man, I don't know if you want into that group chat. I'll tell you that much. But Michael Pittman Jr., you have him all the way down at wide receiver 55. I mean, at this point, is he rostered in a 10-team league?
I wouldn't. I'd put that problem on somebody else's hands. Like, same thing with like a Zamir White, I think is like the perfect running back example in a 10-team league. A Mark Andrews, like, let somebody else deal with that floor. The floor is so low. You know what I mean? Like, you're digging a basement with the floor there, right? Like it keeps getting lower and lower. And now Josh Downs is back, by the way, and he had a higher targets per route run rate than Pittman did. And we saw last year, again, everything with Anthony Richardson is a limited sample, but he targeted Josh Downs more when Downs played while he played than Pittman. So Pittman's in that weird spot where it's like he's not the deep downfield threat that Alec Pierce is, that Richardson loves to throw those deep balls, even though he only hits about 1 every 5 or so. But Pierce is in that role. Josh Downs is in the layup target role, which is like the screens and slants. And Pittman's is in this like X receiver, like corner post route where like he's going to win contested catches. Well, you know what the problem is that Anthony Richardson is the worst quarterback in the league at throwing contested catches because they're not accurate. So I look, when you do this Fantasy Pros ranking system, when you submit your rankings or you update them, if you have a guy that's like so far off the consensus, they'll give you a warning before you publish. And it'll be like, are you sure you want to rank Pittman this low? I had him before I published this today in the 60s. And it said, are you sure? Because the consensus was in like the 30s, I think. 37 consensus. So I bumped him up to 55. I think it's still too high. Like I got him ahead of Josh Downs, who I mentioned, and Tutu Atwell and Gabe Davis. I honestly would feel more confident starting Tutu Atwell this week than Michael Pittman, especially against the Steelers. Like, that's kind of like, okay, Joey Porter Jr., no thank you, man. Like, I'm just not doing it. He's a cut in a 10-team league, in my opinion. He is just like bury on your bench until Joe Flacco gets in there at some point. Maybe Richardson gets banged up running the ball, and we get some Flacco weeks. That's the only hope you have if you're a Pittman owner. You can't trade him for anything right now.
Any other wide receivers for week 4 specifically, a little bit further down the board?
No, because we talked about a lot of this in the rest of the season rankings. That's what we kind of wanted to do, is like set the table for the long term and not get into like some of the obvious things we know week to week. But I think guys like Xavier Leggett, I mentioned him. I think Jalen Tolbert is a viable starter in a plus matchup against the Giants. We see the Cowboys throwing the ball a ton this week, last week, and for the rest of the season, I expect that as well. Once you get further down the list, I mean, like I mentioned Dontavian Wicks, I think Trey Tucker is like a super deep, deep threat type of target for the Raiders. We saw rack up a bunch of targets last week, although about half of those targets came when Aiden O'Connell was in the game. I'm just not going that far down the board. Once you get, like, for example, the guys I have ranked ahead of Pittman, Tolbert, Leggett, Michael Wilson, great matchup against the Commanders this week, Jalen Naylor with the Vikings. Those are guys I'd rather start over Pittman. That's in like the wide receiver 48 to 50 range. So that's kind of giving you some context in terms of like quote unquote sleepers who are going to be ranked lower than Pittman in the consensus, but who I have ranked ahead of him. And I just would not start Pittman for any reason at all this week.
At the tight end position, I think we've really talked about most of the guys who are worth talking about this week already. There's only one name that I think is worth hitting on, only because you have him as a fringe tight end starter. ECR has him down at 19. That's Noah Fant in Seattle. I know you love the pass game for Seattle. And I'm guessing that a lot of this has to do with the fact that in Detroit we're talking about a fast track, a high total.
Yep.
Is that what it is with Fant, or is there more to it?
No, it's 100% it. I mean, game environment is huge. When you get into these tight ends, where like we don't feel good about any of them. So what's the game total? What's the implied team total? Lions are near the top of the league, but I think the Seahawks they're right up. I mean, they're in the middle range. They're projected for at least 21 points this week, so that's solid. And on the fast track, like you said. The Lions are 20th or worse in coverage grade per PFF through 3 weeks this season. They are more beatable on the short intermediate routes where slot receivers and tight ends are going to run their routes. So I think that I'd rather take that upside. Gesicki, Ertz, like they're okay. They're going to get you on a good week, like 4 for 40, 5 for 50. I think Fant has athleticism to break off a big play, yards after the catch, and I like his situation better. Noah Fant versus Mark Andrews, like I would feel more comfortable this week starting Noah Fant. I have Andrews ranked ahead of him right now. I think Tyler Conklin, Noah Fant, even Brock Wright, I would consider like those guys. I think maybe where the cutoff with Andrews would be like Mark Andrews versus Brock Wright. And, let me just give the old guy Mark Andrews one more shot. But that's where I consider those fringe guys. And by the way, I've got Cole Kmet, tight end 6. So there's no question I'm starting him. I've got Cole Kmet one spot behind Kelsey. And honestly, Cole Kmet has way more upside than Travis Kelsey. So that might be flipped by the end of the week as well.
Let's spend just a few seconds each on defenses and kickers here. I'll point out just 2 things that stick out to me on your DST rankings, and then, you can hit me with any other thoughts that you have. One team you're way above market on, Buffalo Bills against Baltimore. You've got them all the way up at number 7 this week. ECR has them at 16. The other team that I want to make sure we address, the Cincinnati Bengals, you have all the way ranked at number 30, despite the fact that they're facing Carolina. You really are all the way bought in on Andy Dalton and the Panthers.
Well, for this week, I am. I mean, come on. You're just trying to rub it in here, Dalton. I mean, look, the Bengals defense can't stop anybody right now. Will they, who's going to get, who is this a revenge game for? Is it a revenge game for the Bengals for all of the years Andy Dalton failed them in first round playoff games, 0-7 in first round playoff games in the Andy Dalton, Marvin Lewis era? Or is this a revenge game for Dalton? Like, I honestly don't know. I think that Lou Anarumo is going to have something to prove, but does he have the playmakers to really make a difference? Like, I mean, technically the Bengals are supposed to have two elite pass rushers in Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, but I don't know what happened in week 3, man. Like, I posted fire Zach Taylor in all capital letters on my Twitter after that game. They got to do something. I don't know. I think the Panthers should be favored in this game. So, that's kind of where it's at right now. I think with the Bengals, we've seen them have so many slow starts. Like, this is a team where just when you count them out, they're going to bounce back. But it's tough to buy them in the moment. Trust me, I'm fully bought in the Bengals offense, but not the defense. A couple guys I like, a couple teams I like, DSTs. I think the Broncos are underrated. Their defense has been top 5 in fantasy scoring. I think you can get after Rodgers a little bit, even though he looked really good against the Patriots last Thursday. The Bills, they've been a top 5 defensive unit as well. And Lamar Jackson, if he has to drop back a lot, we're talking about potentials for sacks, for fumbles, for interceptions, etc., with a very weak passing cores we've seen so far. And I think the Texans, to an extent here, going up against Jacksonville at home, like a big bounce back opportunity. I like the pass rush and the amount of pressures that the Texans defensive line has been able to get. And we've seen a very shaky offense for Jacksonville so far. Let me wait to see who the Dolphins starting quarterback is. If it's Tim Boyle, I'm going to move the Titans defense up considerably. If it's Snoop Huntley, who runs the ball more and I think is better, then I'm going to be more modest with my Titans and Dolphins defenses. So I've got them 8-10 right now. That's why I've got the Texans and Bills. They're better teams, even though the matchup on paper technically isn't as advantageous. That's why I've got those 2 teams ranked slightly above the Dolphins and Titans, who a lot of people are high on this week.
I do want to touch very briefly on one other DST, because this category, more than any other, is one that I feel pretty qualified to speak on when it comes to fantasy, because you're talking more about teams. It's a little bit more of traditional handicapping. I think you have the Rams a little bit too low at 15. And okay. A lot of this is, I just think that
I buy that, by the way, but yeah, go tell me.
Yeah, I think the turnover potential with Caleb Williams is high enough. And I think the Rams are a team that's gaining confidence. Like, that comeback win last week, I think does a lot for their energy level. And I don't think it's getting talked about too much how well they've done in replacing Aaron Donald up front. Jared Verse, Braden Fisk are number 1 and 2 among rookies in pressures so far this season. I actually think that they have a defensive front
Okay.
against a shaky offensive line that can force Caleb Williams into some potential mistakes. So that's the only qualm I have with your rankings. I think the Rams are too low at 50.
I think that's a great call, Dalton. I really think that's a good call, and you're very knowledgeable in fantasy yourself as well as betting. And I've got them right in line with ECR. ECR's got them at 15. I've got them at 15. I think the upside is there. I'm considering them in my DFS lineups this week, which means I think there's upside there. I think the Bears and Rams should both be considered fringe starters because I think the Rams' offensive line issues. The Bears, I thought, were a really good defense heading into the year. They have not looked good so far, but maybe if Caleb Williams can help them out just a little bit, they can perform a little better than expected. So I think there's upside on both DSTs. I might flip that. I might put the Rams 13 and the Bears 15 because I agree we want to take advantage of the rookie turnover potential. That's why I had the Steelers number 1. Hands down, the Steelers against Anthony Richardson are number 1. Right now, they're consensus 3. I don't really understand that. I think like the Steelers, again, could put up 20, 30 fantasy points in so many different ways this week. And let me just say one last thing on defense. The Vikings, if you're in a deep league, I think the Vikings defense is legit. I think they're a problem. What they did against Brock Purdy and then the week after against CJ Stroud, and we don't even know if Jordan Love's going to play this week. Right now, if you look at the ESPN fantasy app, they're projecting the Vikings defense as if Jordan Love is going to play. There's no guarantee. And if Love does play, we don't know if he's going to be 100% or anywhere near that as well. So I think the Vikings with the pass rush, they're number 1 run defense in PFF as well. So this defense, I think, is one of those where you might just plug and play them no matter who they're playing against. And I think you might be able to say that sooner than later. Similarly about the Texans and the Bills. The Bills probably second out of that 3. So I think the Vikings, the projected points might only say 5. I think that's wrong. And I think the upside's way bigger for them. So I think the Vikings are a really good stash because no matter who they're playing, this team can rush the passer in a hurry. And that's what I'm looking for in my weekly DSTs in terms of upside.
Any thoughts at all on the kicking position for week 4? I know when we're talking about kickers, we're really talking about playing roulette to a degree. Yeah. Obviously, we're looking for good scoring environments, good offenses. Any particular thoughts this week at all on kickers?
No, I mean, I'm pretty in line. Bass, I'm a little higher on. The Bills are projected for a decent amount of points. Eddie Pinheiro, I think the Panthers offense will do well. So I think he's a viable kicker as well. I've got him as kicker 11. The consensus ranks have him near the bottom. So I think he's a starter. I think the Vikings-Packers, we could see 2 solid defenses. The offenses I respect, maybe we see some red zone struggles to where I think Braden Narvison for the Packers, if Love plays, by the way, and then Will Reichard, or Reichard, however you say it, for the Vikings, I think could both be solid plays as well. I want to avoid the Bucks against the Eagles. I think that could be a slog. The Eagles are going to try to really get that game over quickly without their weapons. So I'm a little lower on the Bucks kicker and Eagles kicker than I normally am. I'd say the same thing for the Bears. I've got the Bears kicker ranked 6 spots below because I just don't trust Caleb Williams yet. I trust him maybe to throw 40-plus times, which is why I think you can get some garbage time points for the pass catchers, but I don't necessarily trust the team to score all that many touchdowns. So that's how I'm approaching Mike. It's really about what do I think of the team offense, and that's going to be whether I'm higher or lower on a lot of these kickers at the end of the day.
All right. Well, I think that does it for week 4. We went a little long. We went into a lot of detail through a lot of names. So, I'm guessing if you've got a fantasy team, we probably gave you a pretty good rundown of the guys that you've got starting this week and what you should expect. I can't say enough about Chris's success so far this season and what he did last season. If you are looking for one guy to follow, it's tough to find somebody better than he is right now. You can find him on Twitter at Mad Journalist, at MADD Journalist. My Twitter is at Dalton on Sports. I don't tweet about fantasy football nearly as much as Chris, though. Make sure you're looking at what he's doing. Chris, any last words?
No, you said it all. Make sure to check out post-gazette.com. I post my weekly Sunday strategy column every Sunday morning at 4 a.m. So the second you wake up for Sunday kickoff, you're going to get that column. You're going to get my updated 1 injury away stash rankings, my sleeper rankings, as well as my fully updated top 150, where I'm also ranking top 150 flex, which is running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. I also separately rank quarterbacks, defenses, and kickers every week, and I update those rankings daily throughout the week as well. So you're getting the best of the best at the end of the week at post-gazette.com. You can find the rest of my work over at bettingpredators.com, which is my website as well. We're trying to strive for the best, man. I got the vibes on this week. I got the Caitlin Clark shirt. So shout out to the baller, the GOAT Caitlin Clark here. I'm trying to be the best, man. I'm trying to be the best in the biz, just like she is in the WNBA, and just like Kobe is in the NBA. Shout out to Kobe Bryant too, and all the Kobe lovers out there too. So man, just really when it comes down to it, this week, I think we're gonna have a similar discussion next week and really start to formulate like who are the top 20, who are the top 30, 40, who are our real starters after a quarter of the way through the season. We'll continue to talk trades, rest of season rankings, everything like that. But yeah, man, it's been a fun show, and I appreciate you hopping on again, man.
Yep. Sounds good. Well, we will talk to you all next week.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.